Hello everyone. My name is Devin Frank and welcome to the yet untitled movie podcast at Point Park University. We have yet to decide on a name. Gonna restart. Michael. How's it going, everybody? My name is Devin Frank.
And my name is Michael Ledbetter.
Hi, I'm once again Alyssa Salander.
My name's Jaden Rivera.
And welcome to the yet untitled movie podcast. And this is a brand new project. Other people can speak if they'd like. We're here today because we're a bunch of film students, mostly, who wanted to honorize a class. And we needed to do a special assignment for that honorized class. And we decided to make a podcast about the movies we watch. Specifically, it's our introduction to screenwriting class. And we're going to be speaking from week to week, or bi-weekly in this instance, about the movies we watched, what we thought of them, want to say about them, and how they tie into our lectures from that week. So, let's do some quick introductions. I already said my name is Devin Frank. My film focus here at Point Park University is directing at the moment. And my favorite movie is Earth to Echo, a little film from 2014.
So I already said my name earlier, but just for clarification, my name is Michael Ledbetter, and my film focus today is going to be lighting. Will it change next week? I don't know. Find out. You'll have to tune in.
Hi, I'm once again Alyssa Salander. My film focus is also directing and producing. Either one, either or. And my favorite movie of all time is 1986's Stand By Me.
Hello, my name is Jaden Rivera. My film focus is directory. And my favorite movie is La La Land.
I'm just realizing I actually didn't list my favorite movie. That's because it's a mystery called A24 Civil War. So it's no longer a mystery.
Okay, so the film we're going to be talking about today is the 2023 movie Problemista. Problemista? I believe it's Problemista.
You're my Problemista.
Thank you. Yes, 2023 film Problemista, directed by Julio Torres, I believe. Now, as far as I can remember, this was actually his directorial premiere. He also stars as the main character, Alejandro. Other notable actors, Tilda Swinton as the character Elizabeth, and RZA as Bobby, as well as some others. So, yes?
He was the leader in the Wu-Tang Clan. That's
yes.
Pretty cool. Also, I did not know that the main character was also the director, which is really cool, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Seeing what he thought of just, being the character and then him being also the director, so it's really cool to, think about, oh, shoot, he did all of that. But it was really cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, overall, leading off on the main character subject Alyssa brought up here, I think it's pretty neat that he played a directing role. He was in a directing role. He was the director. And then he managed to play a character successfully in a movie. That's fairly challenging coming from someone with some film experience. It is pretty hard to balance a whole entire team while also putting yourself in the role of one of the actors. So I gotta respect him a lot for that. And regardless of how you think the film turned out, I think you gotta give him a little bit of respect for the fact that he not only did it, but he managed to do it successfully.
Yeah, so before its proper release, Problemista actually was a short film that took its rounds in the short film circuit. It was nominated for numerous awards, won a few as well, and then it was picked up later and turned into a feature, which is what we watched. Now, as opposed to simply reading a synopsis online or whatever, for our assignments that we do for Intro to Screenwriting, we write what is called a log line for every movie that we watch after we watch it. And a log line is essentially an elevator pitch. It's one, at most two sentences, where you briefly describe the central plot of a film, right? So we're going to go around and we're each going to share the log lines that we wrote for this film independently, cross-reference them, and then talk about the film in general. So, I'll begin. When Alejandro, a reserved immigrant and aspiring toy maker, faces uncertainty with his citizenship, dreams, and career, he must learn to work with unlikely allies and tread into new territory before the sands of his time run out. Thank you. Michael?
Well, I'll go out and just say what we're all thinking. That's a really great log line. And let me tell you, that one is blowing me out of the water before I even got in the ocean. Anyways, here's my log line. An inspiring toy maker must work alongside a crazy artist fighting against time to secure his place in the U.S. before his visa runs out.
That's not blown out of the water. That's pretty good.
I like that was
Pretty
nice and
solid.
simple, and it was good. It was like straight to the point. Mine's something, all right, but it's a young man from El Salvador dreams big to become a revolutionary toy maker for Hasbro, but holds on tight to his dreams as he races time, getting a work sponsor with a crazy woman as she dreams of keeping her husband's spirits alive and achieving his dreams he always wished for.
Jane, do you have a log line?
Yes. A washed-up magician must pull off one final trick to save his small town from bankruptcy. After aliens steal all the world's Wi-Fi, a stubborn gamer leads a rebellion armed only with dial-up internet. What a crazy world we live in.
Thank you, Jaden. And thank you, OpenAI. Okay, so. Yeah.
I do love the alien plot. Let's just get that out there. It was great.
So Problemista is about a young immigrant who aspires to be a toy maker, and he ends up working with this very eccentric, crazy, sort of mean woman named Elizabeth. And her husband, Bobby, was an artist. He was the man played by RZA. Decided to cryogenically freeze himself. And she is attempting to get his artwork on a show while he's in deep sleep for the future, right? And, at the same time, the main character, Alejandro, or just Ale, he is an El Salvador immigrant, right? You mentioned, and he has to work to maintain his sponsorship visa. However, he worked at that cryogenics lab. He was actually the one assigned to Bobby, but then he accidentally unplugged the backup power generator and promptly got fired, meaning he's in desperate need of work in order to maintain citizenship in the U.S., right? And that's when he starts working with Elizabeth to help put together Bobby's show, while also trying to get his visa. That's the main plot line of things, right?
Yeah, generally I would agree that's the main plot line of the movie.
Yes. Now, okay, first of all, what did we all think? Did we all enjoy, not enjoy? What did we think of Problemista? Let's start with Alyssa.
Hi. So I thought, okay, Problemista was definitely a roller coaster. I thought it was thematically good. Like, all the effects were really cool, and like what they did with the color composition with like the red and the blue between Alejandro and Elizabeth, and like the symbolism there, I thought was really cool. And also all of his things that Alejandro like imagines in his like mind, I thought that was really cool and strange. But I don't know, the movie was just, honestly, it was not that it was boring, but like it just like got kind of lost for me. Like at the beginning I was kind of confused, especially with like just like the imagery. But like I think at the very end, like I would say like the third act really summed it up, and it really like explained it well about the actual theme and like what they were trying to do. But I thought like the themes were great, and what they were trying to symbolize with the whole film was good. But there were definitely some points that I thought were a little bit boring or just like didn't make sense to the plot. But overall, I thought it was definitely an interesting film.
Alright, I know you're all excited to hear my opinions, but I think it'd be vital if we hear from Jaden's opinion first. I think he has a very interesting take on the movie as a whole.
Yeah, Jaden, would you like to share?
Sure. I thought the imagery was fantastic. It was out of this world. I'd never seen anything like it. The red and blue, it was very interesting. And I would like to see more movies like that.
Yeah. I too would like to see more movies like that, and thank you for bringing up the red and blue. Michael, What do you think?
Personally, I'll say I think my opinion might be unpopular. Unlike Jaden's and I think we have unpopular opinions. The movie is fantastic. I enjoyed every aspect of it, down from the color design, the cinematography, to the story choices, and just how fantastically wonderful and fantastically weird the entire movie was. Seriously, it was a trip. It was weird, and I loved it. I thought the designs of the characters, like Craigslist, was interesting. I thought Alejandro seemed like a relatable guy. I thought Elizabeth, even though she was kind of mean, she reminded me of people I know, and I actually kind of like her, even though she is, in all intents and purposes, kind of a butthead. But that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. But I like that Bobby isn't perfect. I like that Elizabeth isn't perfect. And I like how they both just kind of coincide with their imperfectity, and they still love each other, and they still care for each other. Kind of. And and I like that, Elizabeth is willing to have her problems be solved, if it is in her weird roundabout ways of solving her issues with the help of Alejandro. And I like that, they do the theater scenes where he goes all theatrical, how she literally turns into a Hydra, in the shadow form, not a literal form. But I like the costume design. It reminds me a lot of like theater production, and I thought it was nicely wrapped into the story as a whole. And then I thought the ending, I'll say it, I was kind of hoping both of them just wouldn't be alive, or they just wouldn't address if they ever were. I feel like that would be a little bit more interesting, leave it more vague. But I also kind of liked the direction they went in, where they did address it, they showed it, and Alejandro's there too. He's like, hey, I'm old now, what up? And she's like, oh my gosh, it's Alejandro. And then Bobby's just standing there in the background the whole time, not really doing much of anything. Poor Bobby.
Yeah.
Also, rip to the robots. She was so mean to them for no reason. They looked like lovable little guys. But yeah, overall, I'm rambling. The story was fantastic. I love it. I want to see more like it.
And I have to say, Michael, I'm right alongside you there. I'm right with you. I for how absurd and truly weird of a movie it was, I actually found myself thoroughly enjoying it. I did. It was also, for one, I thought it was just really funny. Like, the humor really did land with me. Again, I mentioned that absurdity, that weirdness, the strange, some of the very strange artistic decisions. You mentioned their depiction of Craigslist as just like a dude in space in like a field of junk. And there's like camera artifacting and data moshing on him, like he's in a digitalized space. I thought that was really interesting. It's written in a very peculiar way. It's edited in a peculiar way, which we'll talk about more in depth in a little bit here. But I still found it very enjoyable from top to bottom, start to finish. I thought it was quite the fun movie, right? We talked about everything already. We talked about when it came out. Again, it's 2023, so it's a much more recent film, which was interesting because, a lot of in film school, you watch a lot of classics and stuff, so it's nice that we also get some more contemporary films. For our first class, for instance, we watched Nope by Jordan Peele, which is also a very recent film. And Michael has some thoughts on that.
I thought you were going to call that one a classic for a moment. It is. It will be in the future, but for right now, it's still fairly recent.
Well, I was talking about the contemporaries we've watched, and that's one of them. But also, we've watched some older films. Thelma and Louise, for instance. Obviously, it's not an old film, but it's starting to show its age. Not in terms of content, but, just in terms of the actual progression of time. Jurassic Park we've watched as well. That's a bit of an older film. So it's nice that we also get some newer things, because again, this is intro to screenwriting. So it's important to understand the screenwriting space as it exists now, right? And a lot of the conventions and the decisions that we hold today when it comes to writing an interesting script. So yeah, we already shared our log lines. Anyone else have any more general thoughts about Problemista before we dive into some more specifics? Michael?
I don't know if I have general thoughts about it, but let me think. The Craigslist guy. Love it. I love the depiction that Craigslist is just like this semi-creepy, not really a creepy guy entity thing that just exists in this void that you walk up to and you talk to him and you interact with him and he's like, oh, you want a job? Here's a job for you. Like, okay, thank you, Mr. Craigslist. And that's it. I just love that little depiction of it. It's humanizing to a dehumanized thing.
Right.
But it isn't really dehuman. It's just not a human entity.
Exactly.
Cleaner boy.
Do you want to talk about the cleaner boy scene real quick?
I think he should. But
Yeah.
before we get to that, one depiction that I don't know if we actually talked about much, but like was his mother. I'm so happy that they kept going back and forth between like the points of views of the busyness and the rambunctiousness of New York City compared to the very calm, like naturey side of El Salvador that his mother was, in like depiction of the entire time. Like it really shows the differences between both parts. And I love how in the film her and her son, they're both still very connected even though they're on different parts of the world. And it just really shows like the opposites that it can come with going to achieve your dreams, saying like, hell, I'm gonna go do this. And I'm just really happy that in the end Alejandro got what he wanted.
Right.
You know, speaking of the mother, that reminds me actually, when I watched the trailer with Alyssa, I believe it was, originally I thought this movie was a tale of a boy whose mother would create these magical things for him, and he kind of just lived in the woods. And I thought the whole New York thing was like him escaping or him getting lost in the real world versus the fake world his mother's created. I mean, if you watch the movie, that's not at all what it is about. But I do enjoy the fact that the mother, she does actually create these things for her child to enjoy. She cares very deeply about her son, but she also wants what's best for him. Yeah, I enjoy that. It's a very positive motherly influence in the film. Overall, I just think it's a great depiction. My throat's giving out, so I'm gonna give it back to someone else.
Yeah. So, Jaden, do you have any additional final thoughts about Problemista before we move on?
You know, I think he did. About the, what was it, the cleaning scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what's powerful is how the film, it doesn't like sanitize the moment. It isn't very glamorized. Instead, it kind of like lingers in discomfort. Kind of forces us to reckon with how the system kind of pushes people into corners.
Very interesting observation.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic response. It's completely different to what he said earlier, but you know what? I like that one a lot better. Good job Googling.
Yeah, now, if you guys aren't familiar, the cleaner boy scene is a segment where the main character, Alejandro, desperate for a chunk of change, takes a job on Craigslist where he goes to a man's house and begins cleaning, and it's like that man's kink, and he starts like making moves on Alejandro as he's cleaning. Not there's nothing major like on camera, but there's a lot of insinuated, sexual action there, which is again an interesting addition.
Yeah.
An interesting addition, I'll say.
Sorry, I just wanted to like pop in real quick. That scene was so uncomfortable, and like, yes, I see what they're doing because he's like desperate for that money and everything, but like it just was so weird. Like, it's like he got there, he was like, yeah, this is weird, you want me to take my pants off? Okay, but you still want me to clean? Okay. And then he just like looked like he was like into it. Like, it was just a very weird scene, but I don't know how. Yeah, it was just a weird scene, but it really like shows like how desperate Alejandro was to get that money and be able to stay here.
And remind me, how old was Alejandro?
He's like in his 20s, I believe, right? So somewhere around there.
I think he's around his 20s.
Young adult.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Grown man.
Grown man I'm not. Anyways, no. That I will agree though. When watching that scene, I did feel uncomfortable. I think it's important to the movie in a way. It makes it more grounded in reality that people do things that are uncomfortable to themselves when they're desperate. And I think that's what Alejandro is in this situation. He was desperate. He needed to do that. And I think that actually just made it even more uncomfortable because you know that he would not do this otherwise, because he expressed that he would not do it before. He denied it. He kept denying it. He never wanted to take that job. And when finally he was at his breaking point, this is when he finally took the job. He finally took the money. I think it was like $200.
Right.
And yeah, it feels like a really low amount for what he has to do. And yeah, he never really elaborates on how he feels about it afterwards. And I don't know. It was just kind of uncomfortable.
Right.
The whole the whole scene was just awkward. It was slow. It was like, oh my gosh. But yeah.
All right, so let's pivot for a moment and let's talk about formatting for scripts, right? And also, a more technical side of writing. But obviously, since we don't have immediate access to a script, actually, no, I think we do, but we don't have it right now. Let's just talk about the way the movie is formatted, it's structured, the way it's written, the way it's edited, things of that nature, because there's a lot of interesting decisions in that regard too. I'll start with this, Michael. You mentioned earlier the whole medieval theater-esque element. A little bit of context. The character Elizabeth in the art world in this movie is sometimes referred to as the Hydra. The whole point is that whenever someone addresses an issue that she's bringing up, she sprouts it into several new ones, like a Hydra's head. So I'll say there's a scene where Alejandro and her are arguing, and in the midst of their argument, they interlace it with this very, again, theater-esque looking set where Alejandro is a knight and Elizabeth is a dragon, right? A Hydra. And it's like a battle between the two. It's a bit more homebrewed looking, right? Homespun, something of that sort. But also they incorporate a lot of shadow puppetry and things of that nature. So it's a lot more practical effects as opposed to special effects. And I was wondering how we thought about, how we felt about that as an artistic decision. Or potentially a constraint. Again, this started in the short film circuit. So it may have been Torres working with the resources he had, or it may have been an artistic decision, or a combination of both. I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Personally, I don't think I have it any other way. I like the low budget feel to it. I don't really think it is low budget feeling, but I get where others are coming from. If it was animated or if it was like CGI based where she really was a Hydra and you got to see all that, I feel like it would take away from a lot of the magic. I kind of like that she is grounded as a character. She clearly is playing the character of a Hydra, and he's clearly just dressed like somebody playing the character of a knight, because that's what they're playing inside this imaginary story. They're just playing characters. They're not really these things. And I think it fits the theme of the movie so well, because a lot of what they're doing is practical art. Alejandro's mother is a monumental artist. She makes monuments for different things. I mean, it's not really elaborated on, but it is elaborated on at the very end a little bit with her whole puzzle monument throughout the town. Alejandro himself is an inspiring toy maker. He wants to make different toys, and you can see that in his little videos. When he cuts away, he has different toys and different toy ideas. And Elizabeth herself is a painter. She physically paints on canvas, and so does Bobby. They're all very physical aspects of the job. They're all real. They're all there. They're all like, you could just see them. You don't need to have a digital screen to be able to see it, kind of like you may with CGI in film. And I feel like that kind of just grounds it in the in-universe part of the movie. And I feel like that's how Alejandro himself would think about it, because he has this artistic background from his parents and he works in an artistic field. So I can feel like the character himself would think in this theater-esque looking environment rather than one that is like a literal depiction of a knight versus a literal Hydra.
Very interesting. Alyssa?
I completely agree with that. I think I do really love the theater-esque, and it just personalizes it more, I feel like, because yes, it's not real and it's just all in his head, but I really love the depiction of art, and I can only imagine what the script would look like. But I just liked how he had reality, his own world, but then in another part of his mind he would always imagine or think of this other things, like the Craigslist, the knight, and then the dragon. Also he would depict other people that he would just encounter, just random characters or background moments, but it really shows to me how just how much he was fighting, and how much I feel like Alejandro, he's a very introverted character, so you can always tell something's on his mind, or he's thinking about something. And I'm really glad that they brought in that aspect of what's actually going on in his mind to the screen, because it's just so much more than, I feel like it's so much more personal with the audience that he's just telling it to us rather than like everyone in the story. Like it just really shows the side of him that nobody gets to see besides us. And I think that's really special.
Yeah. Jaden, what do you think of the choice of the theater-esque stuff?
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So yeah, no, something really interesting about this movie that I notice is that every character does have a very distinct voice, particularly the main cast. You know, obviously Alejandro and Elizabeth have not only very defined, very unique character voices, but they're also like foils to each other. You know, Alejandro is very reserved, much more quiet. You mentioned introverted. Alyssa keeps to himself a lot more, whereas Elizabeth is loud and obnoxious and throws tantrums about like everything, right?
Karen. She's a Karen.
Essentially, yeah. Like final boss level Karen, because she really does manage to make an issue out of everything, and she just like keeps talking. She cannot get just one thought out, right? It's always a stream of consciousness from her. While we hear that in the background, and then we focus on Alejandro, who's just like checking out the room, right? So, and even some of the other characters as well. You know, obviously Bobby has sort of his own voice in what little we see of him. You know, people mention his narcissism, and he does have sort of that more pretentious artisty air to him. But I think there's a lot more theming with Bobby to be explored, and we can talk about that later once we talk more about the themes. But I'm speaking strictly on the writing side. I think it's really interesting how they managed to give a unique voice and charm to every character with how they speak, right?
Yeah, one thing I really enjoy about the movies, it feels like that no character ever really does something you could ever consider to be out of character. Even in their most flawed aspects, they never seem to break their mold, so to speak. Everything they do is either because they grew, they learned, or they developed in some way, or it was just already a part of their established character, and that's just how they behave. Like, I don't dislike Bobby at all for how he acts or how he behaves. I don't know a lot about him, but like, any action that he ever done never seemed to be out of character. Any action Elizabeth ever done, it was always in character. Even when it was selfless, it still always felt a little bit narcissistic or selfish. And that felt great for Elizabeth, because, you know, that's just how her character is. And then when Alejandro would finally, you know, step out of his shell, he never really lost his reservedness. Like, even when he was arguing with who he would now come to work with at Hasbro, he basically just apologized to the guy right away, and it was like, listen, you're gonna give me the job right now, and also I'm gonna work with you in the future, and I understand I'm being mean right now, but I won't be like this in the future. This is just a now thing. And I really enjoy that, because it's so Alejandro, like, you know, he's a nice guy. He doesn't want to be mean.
For characters, I specifically wrote down for Elizabeth that I like what you said about how they never like break character. Like, there's always like something that makes sense why they do it. You know, it's not just like add a character for them to do. But one thing that I did notice a lot was when, like, in the flashback scenes with her and Bobby, she was a lot more laid back and like more caring for him. Like, yes, she still had that like problem-esque like personality where she would just like argue with him and be like, you know, talk about his paintings and, you know, get in arguments with baristas or whatever. But like, she did like care for him, she respected him, and she loved him. And I just think before Bobby died, she wasn't so Karen final boss. Like, I think she was a lot better with herself. And I think whenever Bobby did die, that's when she finally like light kind of switched, where she just became more problematic. Problemista.
I mean, don't forget, technically Bobby didn't die. He was just frozen, but he was away. You know, speaking to the characters a bit more, there's only one character I didn't...
Well, I actually want to go back a little bit.
Oh.
Back to the whole Bobby not being dead thing. Because, you know, Alyssa, I was thinking about, to me, in the story, Bobby is dead. He's not around. As far as Elizabeth is concerned, she will never see Bobby again. She'll never know if Bobby ever will survive. It changes near the end of the story, but for years, Elizabeth has been dealing with the loss of her partner. You know, for all all intents and purposes, Bobby has been dead the entire time up until the very end of the film. And to Elizabeth, he's never coming back. You know, it's a reality that she has to accept that her partner got stage 4 cancer and that he may be alive, but for all intents and purposes, she had to put him in the coffin, put him in the grave, and bury him. And then she's left to pick up the burden and take care of him for the rest of his years, because now, instead of being dead, where she can finally let go and grieve, she's stuck in a perpetual cycle. Her whole life has to resolve around Bobby. From the moment that he froze himself, she couldn't stop caring about him. She couldn't leave him. She had to keep paying for his stuff. She had to keep his memory around. She had to keep everything he'd done alive. She had to keep trying to pursue their goals. So now you have this character who's already a bit out there in how their speaking style. Now she's constantly in a state of grief, and she has no way of really coming to terms with the loss of the person she loved, because they're not gone. And if she wants to keep them that way, then it's up to her to keep funding it so that he isn't completely gone, because she can't allow herself for him to be completely gone. She probably go insane. But at the same time, it's like he's basically dead. She's stuck in a middleman state where he is alive because of her, and he is dead forever, and she will never see him again. And I honestly cannot imagine the personalized grief one must feel for a situation like that. I must imagine that it's somewhere similar to having a family member that you love to be in a coma, where you're waiting for them to wake up, and you never know they will, and you're the only one funding the life support, and at the moment you decide you don't want to fund it no more, that's the moment you decide if you pull the trigger or not, and then you have to deal with the consequences of, if it's their death on your hands, is it your fault, or were they just dead the entire time? And that's pretty heavy for a movie.
Yeah, very excellent point. Also, wait, for some reason I thought Elizabeth was the one who was terminally ill.
No, Bobby was.
Okay. I will say, there's only one character, named character that I didn't care for as much, and that's Bingham. He was like that new assistant, remember? The one who knew, oh god, what was it?
He was annoying.
File Master Pro. What is it called?
Yeah, FileMaker Pro. FileMaker Pro software.
So I feel like, obviously not every character has to be dynamic, right? It's okay to have flat characters. I just feel like Bingham didn't really do anything. I feel like he didn't add. I think he was initially meant to be this rival character to Alejandro. He did kind of do that, but like he was presented like that, and then the next time we see him, he's talking to Alejandro and like bitching about how much he doesn't like Elizabeth, and then they go to Maine together, and you're led to believe that like, oh, she's gonna, utilize him in some way, but we never see that happen, or there's no implication that ever happened, because pretty immediately Alejandro calls again, and then she comes back to New York, and we have no idea what the hell Bingham ever did for anything. So I don't know if the character's just unnecessary or if it should have just been handled better.
Well, to address what Bingham ever did at the end, he, if I remember correctly, he went on to be a fashion model for a guy, I think, and they were dating. I think that's what she mentions near the very end. She's like, oh, she wanted to be with some guy he's dating or some as a model for photography, and then he became very successful, I think is what she says. But also, Bingham, I think he fits as an antagonist, because Bingham himself isn't the antagonist. Elizabeth is the antagonist because she puts Bingham in the intern position, which directly jeopardized Alejandro's chances of getting a sponsorship for a visa. And at the same time, the worry wasn't that Bingham was going to take the spot. Bingham did not care. He made it clear that he doesn't care about Elizabeth. Rightfully so. I get it, Bingham. But Alejandro knows that Elizabeth is flaky. We've seen how she talks about her previous workers. She doesn't like them, regardless of how nice they seem. We see how flip-floppy she is with Alejandro himself. She one minute loves him, next minute she's ready to throw him, kick him out the door. So it makes a lot of sense that he's worried that Bingham is going to take the internship, the thing that will get him that sponsorship visa. Not maybe because Bingham wants it, but because Elizabeth will just give it to him regardless. And as for whether or not he knows FileMaker Pro, I think he actually doesn't in the movie. I think everyone just keeps saying they do because this is what she loves, even though nobody really knows how to use it. And let's be honest, nobody does use it. But yeah, I think Bingham works as a character. He doesn't need to be there for very long. He's more of a guard-like character, an obstacle-like character, where he's there temporarily to challenge or get into the way of the goals of our main protagonist. And I think he serves that role very well. He didn't need to do anything because Elizabeth was the one doing it for him.
I was just going to point that out, but Michael did that for me, where I was saying Bingham feels very much like a threshold guardian, which is what we learned in class, which is like Michael said, an obstacle character who stands in between the hero and their goal. And I do think Bingham was very much like this because obviously, like you said, Elizabeth is the main antagonist, but it's good for Alejandro to like challenge himself to I think that's basically what the film was trying to do. They was trying to challenge Alejandro to like stand up for himself and make something of himself so Elizabeth could keep him and want to sponsor him. And I think that's what happened, rightfully so. But not gonna lie, when Bingham was first introduced, I thought there was gonna be like some like love interest type thing going on. I don't know why, but I thought there was gonna be something, especially with I'm gonna go back to the cleaning boy scene real quick. With the cleaning boy scene at the end, when it all happened, it didn't seem like Alejandro was like upset that it happened. Like, you know, it kind of looked like, oh, he looked like he was gonna keep seeing him. But like I thought for sure like there was gonna be either some love interest with that or even Bingham for sure. But then you kind of just see like Bingham just like doesn't care about anything. He's just like, I just have to do this because like she's family, but like I don't give a shit about her. I'm like, man, okay, whatever. But I just thought he was definitely there to throw in like some conflicts for Alejandro, but besides that, I just think he was kind of annoying.
Jaden, what did you think of Bingham?
Bingham? Yeah, he was annoying. I don't think he should have been there because he was causing complications with Alejandro, and you know, I think Elizabeth was just wrong for hiring him.
Understood.
I know. Gosh, Alyssa's name was slipping my mind there. But I know Alyssa mentioned the fact that she thought Bingham was going to be a love interest character. You know what? I can agree. I didn't really think that at first, but also, you know, looking back on it, there really is no love interest character for our main character, Alejandro. We have a clear one for Elizabeth, we have two of them for Bobby, but we don't really have a single one for Alejandro, and I'm not counting the cleaning scene because, gosh, that was just creepy.
Well, okay, don't completely discount the cleaning scene, because I actually find it interesting that, you know, Alejandro's sexuality is never specified, never explained. Now, that makes the cleaning scene all the more interesting because, like, you know, it sort of leads you to question, like, did he actually, like, kind of like it, or was it just a money thing, right? Because we don't know. We don't know if he likes dudes. We don't know if there's meant to be some sort of queer story or queer message there at all. It's never specified. And I think that's kind of cool because, like, there are already so many plots going on in this movie. I almost feel like a romance, like, G plot with how many plots there are would be a lot. So I'm kind of glad that there isn't really a specific romantic interest character. I feel like someone who is much more educated on queer media could maybe do a really interesting analysis of any potential queer coding in Problemista, but I don't think that's a whole other thing at the moment.
I know someone, I'll call them up for it. I'll go, hey, we need a queer analysis deep dive in the movie. They go, oh my gosh, I'm on it right now. But I do discount the cleaning scene slightly, mainly because to me, I do just perceive it as just that, like just a job. It's not to discount Alejandro's sexuality, nor does it need to ever be implied. I kind of do like that they never really discuss it. Mainly because it never becomes a real central plot point to the film, but I think it's interesting that it's just out there. He's just a character. They don't feel the need to address it because at the end of the day, it doesn't make Alejandro any different. You know, I enjoy that. A lot of movies maybe would lean more into it, and maybe because they want to, or it's about the story, or maybe because it's kind of like, I don't know a word to use for it, but, you know, like it's kind of just there to be there. Like just throwing a love story in for the sake of throwing it in there. And I kind of like the movie just went, we don't really need it for this one. But yeah, I do discount the cleaning scene only a little bit just because it literally is a paid job. And that's why, by discounting though, I do mean I just don't really consider that guy to be a love interest for the main character.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a tiny bit about the editing decisions and we talked about the theatrics, some of the creative decisions, like with Craigslist, and some of the more artistic decisions. But also, the film is edited in a very peculiar way. It has something that stuck out to me It has a very distinct soundtrack, and it utilizes sound in a very stark way. You know, music will just like come in out of nowhere for like a tense moment for a few seconds, and then someone will start talking and it'll just go away, right? They use music in a very intense fashion, right? To build suspense or some other emotion. There's a lot of times, I noticed there are a few times in the film where there's a lot going on. Alejandro almost goes through sort of a sensory overload thing, and there's these quick cuts to all these different areas, and the music starts to build, and then he snaps back into reality, and he's like somewhere else entirely, right? It's quite avant-garde in that respect, in how it's like actually pieced together to tell the story. There's a lot of voiceover work. There's a lot of, they kind of do that thing that Barbie does sometimes, where there's a narrator that'll chime in for like little random jokes or elaborations. I love that. I mentioned I love the humor. That was something that always got me. I don't know, it's pieced together so much like a disjointed, like imagine your like grandpa's telling a story at the bonfire, but his memory's starting to get a bit bad. So he's like jumping around a little bit, sort of a vibe I get. Alyssa?
I was actually thinking like Barbie too. Like I was just gonna say that because I do like the narration. Like it does feel very much like what they did in Barbie. I like the narration because it kind of just takes you through his life and like his home life, definitely how he lived then and how he is now. It's just like a good little like not side character, but like little voice to, you know, to be like he's not just by himself. Like someone's watching him, going him through this journey, just like his mother. Like it always feels like his mother is just with him, because I think that's the voice his mother. I think that's what I thought too. I really like that they did the narration just to like keep him in check and to make him believe that he's still not by himself. But I also did like what you said, Dev, about the music. Like it wasn't like pop songs or major songs that was added. It was more like the instrumental, which I think did an even better job than like, because I don't think like this movie is strange enough where like I just feel like it doesn't need like actual copyrighted music. Like I'm glad that they had their own instrumental stuff, because I think that even made more of an impact than if you would just hear a song that you heard on the radio or something.
So I have a suggestion. We start calling it Problemistas. Other than that, though, I really did enjoy the editing a lot. I did love the constant back and forth. Like when they were when Alejandro and Elizabeth were arguing, one of my favorite scenes was when they would cut back and forth between the real world, the imaginary world, and well, actually that's it. That's the only two worlds they were cutting back and forth to. But I enjoyed it. You know, sometimes they stick in the imaginary world and then boom, crash straight to the real world with Elizabeth back on the phone, back to the imaginary world, boom, crash straight back to Alejandro on the phone, you know, going back and forth, back and forth. I also like that sometimes the time itself, like near the end and with the montage, I like that it kind of kept you on your toes, because they worded it in such a way where you weren't really sure if Elizabeth had already done it or if he was going to make it in time to talk with her, get it sorted out. Like he was on the clock, his visa was just about to be there, and then boom, she's passed out, she's cryogenic, she can't sign it anymore. I like the way they worded it. I like the story structure, the montage, the slow amount of time. You were like, okay, is he going to make it in time? No, he's too far away. Oh no, she's in the middle of talking. Oh no, she's gone. She's already gone. But then it's like, oh, the reveal, she's not completely gone. She didn't just up and leave and dust him, leave him behind in the wind, go, hey, thanks for all your work, bye. No, she made sure to secure a few things for him, to make sure that she wasn't just leaving him completely absent, void of his goals. She made sure to sign the visa. She made sure to make sure he had a contract so he could stay and all that. She explained why she was doing it, how she was doing it, and she encouraged him. She gave him motivation. She's like, you know what? Here's the name of that toy guy. You go talk to him right now and tomorrow. You demand that you get that job. And I really enjoyed the editing right there at the very end of the film, because it really felt like it was keeping pace. It was keeping itself on its toes, and it was like this big reveal mystery that was leaning up. And I felt like it was just so satisfying the way it was executed. And that's why I enjoyed the editing the most. The editing is great overall. That's my example of the best amount of editing in the film.
Jaden, what did you think of the film's editing? How it was put together?
He's making a funny face.
He is. It's very funny.
Funny face. I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
Awesome. Okay.
Inspiring director right there.
Indeed.
Thought it was interesting. Quote, Jaden.
Now, I sort of building off of the editing, I want to sort of segue here into theming, messaging, imagery, things of that nature, because there's something I've thought about more, because it's been a few days now since we watched it. We watched it on Tuesday. We're recording this on Friday.
Same week.
Yeah, same week.
Is currently
26th.
26, 12/24.
12/24. I thought you were saying the date. I was like, it is not Christmas Eve. I don't know.
Santa Claus is around the corner, everybody.
No, but something I noticed, I was thinking more about it right here, right now. I want to just spitball it all out. There's a very common thread of individuality, otherism, if that's a really correct term, in finding company, unconventional characters and people finding company in one another. Right? We talked about the editing and how weird everything is in Alejandro's mind, and how when we focus in on Alejandro, there's the music, there's weird editing. He grew up in a very strange house in the middle of like the rainforest. He's a very peculiar character. And the only character he really encounters who matches his, I don't want to say freak, but matches his absurdity, although in a very different way, is Elizabeth. And now, of course, she's like rambunctious and arrogant and loud, but which is, again, stark contrast to Alejandro's character, but they're both so different from the rest of the world that they find solace in one another, right? And I mean, on that same note, before Alejandro, for Elizabeth, it was Bobby, because Bobby is this very, egocentric and sort of a pretentious
snob.
Yeah, very artsy fartsy guy. And he also pulls the misunderstood card. Now, I don't know if that's him being self-righteous, trying to, further justify or further explain his work in his usual pretentious way, but I think some of that outlanderism, in a sense, kind of comes through with his art, which we haven't talked about yet, but Bobby only paints eggs, which is really weird. He has a whole collection of paintings called 13 Eggs.
Ironically, in a baker's dozen.
Yeah, potentially a choice there as well. And each painting is one egg in a weird place. But it's interesting because, the eggs are so bland. They're a very simple shape in a very simple color, and they're in these strange environments. It's almost like a reflection, a reversed reflection potentially of Bobby's feelings, as well as Alejandro and Elizabeth, being out of place in that sense. Except in our instance, the characters are more of the color in a duller world, right? Because, when we see their interactions with other people, like the waiter when Elizabeth complains about her salad, or Bingham, or the artist lady who had the final egg, right? It's so different. It's so different in how they interact and how they speak versus the rest of the world. And there's sort of a commonality there.
Yeah, I would definitely say like the egg aspect is definitely very weird. I thought it was kind of weird. But I liked what you said, how it just like shows how those three characters really connect and how they're all so different from the rest of the world and how they just like do stand out. And I just think it was definitely like an interesting take to the story, but it does work how, the entire plot of the story is finding these 13 eggs and having, winning Bobby his dreams of making a reality TV show or of the eggs or something. It's very interesting, but I just thought the egg aspect was a little bit weird at first, but then it definitely like creeps into more of the storyline and how it actually impacts and why it's so important to the story.
Right. Real quick, Jaden, what do you think of the 13 eggs?
I thought they were pretty interesting. I thought it was funny that there were 13 eggs, but it was in a baker's dozen. And it was really interesting. I thought it added a lot to the story.
Did you like the paintings themselves?
They were odd. They were cool. They were like, they showed like emotion. It was cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mikael.
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but Michael here. Anyways, personally, I like the egg paintings a lot. Though I like how these two have read, I guess these three have read pretty deep into these eggs, where I just looked at them like, oh, that, eggs in Saturn or eggs wherever he was painting them. It's kind of neat. I don't really get the whole egg thing, but I get where he's coming from, where he wants people to look at it and understand and maybe learn something from art, because sometimes art is just a silly little thing on background or a silly little thing in wherever. And you know what? It's enjoyable just because it's there and it's enjoyable. So, I respect the whole egg thing. I get why people don't understand it because I don't if I try to think of a deeper meaning for it. But maybe there is, like the colors of the world being Alejandro and Elizabeth and Bobby and all the artists, and the eggs being the world itself. But that adds weird implications like, okay, egg break open, what is chicken? Or what is animal that come out of egg? Is that world too? Or is that society? And now I'm just rambling in a completely different direction for a different theatrical discussion about eggs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like there may also be layers to it, because maybe I'm digging a bit too deep into this, but...
This is not Shrek with onions. There are no layers of the eggs.
Oh, well,
I'm joking.
If you hard boil them, but... I think the director may have tried to almost make it like a red herring, where on the surface, you look at Bobby, and you think it's a criticism of the art world, and the pretentious nature of it, particularly contemporary art, right? What is considered art? You may be led to believe, oh, he's just another one of those, artists trying to claim anything and everything is art. But I think once you get beyond that, if you look a bit deeper, there is actually a message within. It's sort of hard to put art within art, art within a movie in this instance, and not give it any significance. Have you ever seen a movie where they focus on maybe a character really likes a particular painting or a particular artist, maybe a particular piece of music? Usually that holds some significance to that character. I feel like the deliberate choice to make these paintings for this movie specifically sort of implies that there has to be something there in regards to why they are there,
Mm-hmm. That reminds me a lot with Ferris Bueller's Day Off when, I forget his name, but the guy just stares at the painting. He's like,
yeah,
this means something. And it's just a painting that represents their lives, or the world as it is. Everyone's doing so many different things at once and blah blah blah. I'm going in a different direction, but I do agree with saying there's definitely a deeper meaning to it. It's just it's not well explained, but I think they did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because they wanted to show more of Alejandro than Bobby, which I'm glad they did, because I don't know, I like Bobby, but I don't think he was the best character.
Mm-hmm.
I think he left. Yes, he did have cancer and he was dying, but I think he did it in a very odd way. He was just bye.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go freeze myself, but I'll be back. JK, probably, and then won't. And then, he just leaves her with this whole mystery for her to figure out. But I do like how he incorporates the eggs, and it just gives it more of an odd effect to the actual story. And it is an A24 film, which there's gonna be some weird aspect, but
yeah.
I'm glad that they did that with the eggs.
Right. I mean, also, I'm not, keep in mind, I'm not saying this to imply that we should necessarily like or idolize Bobby, because I don't think we should. Mm-hmm. He cheated.
Fair.
And he was quite selfish in his actions. But I think it's important to dive into that character, at least to an extent, and see what they were trying to get at with him,
Mm-hmm.
I also want to, we're on the topic of art. I want to share what I wrote about art in my reflection here, because this was we had a question about what are some themes you noticed in Problemista? What do you think this movie is trying to, quote unquote, say? Which of the film's writing decisions helped you draw this conclusion? I mentioned two things. The first thing I mentioned was immigration, which I want to talk about in a minute, because obviously that's a huge part of this movie that we haven't really gotten into yet. But I also wrote about art. Said there's a lot of theming about art, specifically how the world treats artists and creatives. Alejandro is a struggling creative whose work is stolen because those he presents his ideas to believe they are above him. It isn't until Alejandro builds up the courage to go out and claim what is rightfully his that things begin to fall into place, because those at the top are only as strong as the imagined power they wield. Once directly faced with adversity, they can crumble. A similar thing happened with Bobby's show. Once Alejandro and Elizabeth saw the size of their venue, they put their feet down and refused to accept anything less than what Bobby, the artist, wanted, so as to maintain the integrity of his vision. So, there's that whole thing where, if you're not familiar, Alejandro had these weird ideas for toys that were more contemporary, more quite strange. One of them was like there
was a truck with a flat tire. There was the doll with the cell phone, so she could read like the text messages.
Mm-hmm. The whole thing is he tries to present those ideas to Hasbro to join their affiliate program. He gets denied, but then later he sees, like a year later, he sees one of his ideas is now out and people love it. And that's like the climax of the movie is after Elizabeth freezes herself to join Bobby. She says, go to that dude who stole your idea and demand he give you a job for what is rightfully yours. And he does. Elizabeth teaches him to have some guts, and he just walks into Hasbro, walks right up to the dude and demands a job. And it works. So I definitely, obviously, I think there's a message in there about artistic integrity and how sometimes creative work is taken for granted because of status, right?
Or how it is stolen by others who have power over those who do not.
Yes. Think of there are many inventors such as Thomas Edison, I believe, or George Westinghouse, who would, as far as I can remember, again, don't take this as an absolute fact, but I've remember learning about this. They would harvest the ideas of those who worked for them and present them as their own, even if it wasn't entirely theirs. Think of Nikola Tesla with the light bulb, for instance. So, there's a lot to be said throughout a lot of history about artistic integrity and how power plays a role in art, right? What are the themes? Do you guys want to keep talking about art, or should we move on to immigration?
I think we covered art pretty thoroughly. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could cycle back if we feel like it relates back again, but I'm good to keep moving on.
All right, so let's talk about immigration.
My favorite.
And this is where the movie gets a lot more topical. Obviously, we mentioned earlier, Alejandro is an immigrant. He is an El Salvadorian, or is it just Salvadorian?
It's El Salvador. You could just say El Salvadorian or Salvadorian.
He's from El Salvador. He's from El Salvador, and he lives in the United States in New York. He has to have his work visa in order to stay there. He needs to get sponsored by an employer. And there are several scenes that take place in the immigration office where they discuss the immigration process in America, right? Notably, there are some moments where immigrants don't get their problems resolved in the office, and they literally just disappear. Like, they just poof on screen, they disappear. Or they phase through things. They phase through people. So there's one point in the immigration office where a man phased through the wall and just walked out. And then later on, when Alejandro's working somewhere, he gets ignored by someone and they walk right through him, right? So, and then there's also this whole presentation of this infinite, room staircase, where he needs to get through a door, but it's locked and the key's on the other side. But if he goes up through the roof, he can enter an identical room to the one that's on the other side of the door, above him. And if he goes through the door, he's back in the room where he started, and he can go down, and it's just up and to the right, up and to the right, up and to the right. It's just the same two rooms stacked.
Or down to the left, down and to the left, down and to the left. You could inverse it.
I speak how I read,
Right to left?
Left to right, because I was going up and to the right.
Fair enough.
So there's certainly some pretty clear messaging about the immigration system, right? What do you guys think?
Oh, that's perfect. I listen before you steal the microphone off of me. One thing I just thought of, when Alejandro's talking about how he has to deal with the ticking clock of time, he feels like there's an hourglass where the sand is dripping down over time, and when it runs out, you're out. You have to leave. I just thought about this right now. Alejandro's name is Alejandro, but on the hourglass, they shorten it down to just Ali, A-L-Y.
A-L-E.
Oh, A-L-E, my bad. Now, the thing is, it could be two things. One, it could be unintentional symbolization, where it's just a production thing, and they thought it'd be easier for audiences to quickly read it, to shorten down his name on the hourglass to go, oh, that's the main character saying, it's sticking down. But the other thing could be symbolism of how a lot of the time, when you're immigrating to different countries, foreign names are just switched to a more easily pronounceable English name, or a main language name. Where Alejandro's name, it's fairly easy to pronounce, but, it could be a symbolization of how other countries will just shorten your name to make it easier for them to write or them to pronounce, etc. So it could be a talk about that, or a little bit of a nod or critique of why the hourglass has his name shortened down. Other than that, when it comes to general immigration, I feel like you covered the main points that I could ever cover. You know, a lot of time people disappearing, or how everyone's on a ticking clock the entire time, and how they're all working to get a sponsorship done, or else they're out. So I'm gonna move this over to Alyssa.
I like what you pointed about that hourglass, because I definitely forgot about that. Like, that was like an actual thing. And with the Ale, or I don't know how they pronounce his nickname, but I think that definitely shows symbolism of, like you said, making it shorter so we can say it better. Or I think that's just like dehumanizing him and his culture and just who he is as a person, which I think it just kind of sums up once again, like, I thought a major theme that they were kind of trying to hint at was with immigration was just like kind of slapping the government in the face without actually saying it, which I'm glad that they did that. And they just added like little, like, you can tell in the movie with like the hourglass, the room staircase of, it's like a never ending like work cycle, and like this constant fighting if you are like an immigrant for your freedom here. It was just, I liked how, you know, they said stuff without actually saying it, and I think that just shows, or it showed me at least, the real problem like in the United States and just like anywhere else where immigration does lie. But I'm glad they added all the little points without making it too political, but I'm also glad that they didn't get rid of them, you know.
Well, that reminds me, though, before I forget, one of the main reasons why Alejandro had to work for Craigslist and get a bunch of money there is because he legally cannot accept money from any employer that could sponsorship him without already being under a sponsorship. And then to apply for all the stuff he needs to apply for, I think it cost him like nearly $6,000, I think it was, they said, as a total. So, you know, it's pretty much, you have to work, but you can't work. And if you don't work, then you can't get a job. And then if you can't get a job, you can't stay here to work. So if you want to work here, you have to have the money ahead of time to then be able to work here. But then if you don't, you know, it just spirals. It's a whole big loop of what ifs and requirements. And yeah, I think that's a pretty fair criticism that even the character who is playing as the person in charge of the visa office, you know, he brings up the fact like it's not fair, but that's just how it's written.
So yeah, Jane, would you like to comment on the immigration plotline?
Sure. I thought it was really interesting, like how, I guess they kind of depicted how the immigrants are treated. They're kind of treated as ghosts, or treated as like, how do you say it? They're just like, nobody really sees them, I guess. And like, so when the guy walked through Alejandro, it was kind of just showing how they're not really seen, and I thought that was really interesting. I think the movie plays, I guess it shows how, I guess it shows the struggles of immigration and immigrants.
Very well said. Thank you, Jaden. So, I think we've covered a lot of our key points, right? Anything else we want to bring up? There is that weird, we were actually talking before the podcast about, at the end, the monument that Alejandro's mother makes, that's all the small objects scattered around the world, and she's like, or, you know, scattered around the city, and she's like, oh, you know, they're all different, but they're all connected in some way, or something along those lines. We talked about how it very well may just be sort of a summation of the movie, right?
I noticed a lot of the puzzles themselves are in key movie locations, such as the cleaning area, such as where the cleaning scene takes place, such as where Alejandro lives, such as where Alejandro would visit, such as where Alejandro worked with Elizabeth. A lot of these puzzle pieces, you know, the mother talked about how they represent something to look at. They represent a monument, or they represent a challenge in your way, or they represent something to yourself by looking at them. They don't necessarily have a meaning within themselves. You kind of have to give them that meaning and that purpose. I think it's very fitting that the puzzle pieces represent the overarching story, and that they're in a lot of those key story locations, as well as just kind of random locations.
And also, you know, I want to talk just one more moment about Alejandro and Elizabeth and what they leave for one another. Because I like that in the end they both develop something from one another. Obviously, Alejandro learns to stick up for himself, and sometimes you have to be a little bit of a bitch in order to I hope we're allowed to say that. This is for college, we can say that. Sometimes you have to be a little bit of a bitch to get what you need to get, right? I also feel like Elizabeth learned more from Alejandro to just fend for herself, because obviously she's had to fend for herself, but she's been so stuck in her mind about Bobby, right? Doing what Bobby wanted. This is what Bobby wanted for his show. We got to get Bobby's work finished. That it was Alejandro after their conversation that really made her realize that she needs to just do what she thinks may be best for her, and that's what prompts her to freeze herself as well, right? Because she no longer wants to continue living in a world without her lover, right? And she no longer wants to obsess over what she thinks he wanted in his absence. So, because, Alejandro has to fend for himself for basically the whole movie. He has to fend for himself the immigration stuff. He has to fend for himself with, his roommates slowly, creeping into his space, right? He has to fend for himself to get a job. He has to, to make money. He's so independent without really realizing it that once they finally talk, he can sort of offer that insight to her. I think that's really nice. Other thoughts?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I also was thinking about how, yes, they are foil characters, and they are so different from each other, but at the same time, in the end, they learn something, about themselves, and how they each have a part of their personalities. Like you said with Elizabeth, the entire time she was arrogant, mean, final boss Karen, but she was insecure, and and was going through grief with Bobby, even though Bobby was a little bitch. Sorry, he was. But I'm glad that Alejandro really brought her back into reality and was no, you have to do this. You need to let go of him. You need to resolve your conflict. And I'm glad that's what she did when she went to go see Bobby's mistress, I guess, or his affair. I'm glad that they went and resolved that problem, because it brought another kindled friendship or resolution. Not because they needed to do it to get the painting, but I think in the end, everyone just felt better about themselves. Even the affair, the mistress, she accepted it, and she realized that Bobby wasn't the man that he seemed he was. He wasn't this great guy. He just kind of was a fake, and not the best kind of guy.
Well, also do remember that Elizabeth did not write the apology letter.
Also, she knew about the affair while Bobby was still alive.
Alejandro wrote the letter for her. So she didn't, at that point in the movie, she hadn't changed in that way. But if anything, demonstrated the development of the relationship between Elizabeth and Alejandro, that, he was willing to do that for her.
Yeah, and that she trusted him to do it to get the painting back. It should also be noted that she still did very much not like the girl. As they were leaving the girl's apartment with the painting. She's I don't like her at all.
Jaden, any concluding thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
I thought the movie was a profound, prolific, window into what immigrants have to go through. And so I think it was really just important it's really important maybe just for everybody to watch, just so you can kind of understand, especially if you're not around people who experience that, you can kind of see the other side.
Thank you, Jaden. I would also like to point out that you all have been lied to. Jaden has not seen this movie.
I have.
Not. Jaden,
I actually showed it to him earlier.
Jaden is actually a criminal justice and national security,
Intelligence and national security.
intelligence and national security major. He's just here. So, thank you, Jaden, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jaden. I'll recommend your spy teacher. You did a great job. We didn't even know you didn't watch it. You fit in so well today.
You just you're great at improv. And with that, I think we're about ready to. Obviously, there's still a lot to talk about. We only have so much time, though.
Yeah, I really did wish we got to cover more of the conflicts or some of the more overarching character types that we saw throughout the movie. Like, I'm gonna cover it real quick. The mother is the ally. Elizabeth is obviously the antagonist. Alejandro is our protagonist. Character versus time is the society thing. Not the society, it's the time thing. All that. I wish we got to cover it more, but it's great.
If we end up, if people end up liking this, we could maybe make a part 2.
We have to make more of these, but not on this one.
Yeah, but if demand is high, we could consider revisiting Problemista in the future. But this is where we're going to call it for today. Once again, this was the Yet Untitled Movie Podcast. I'm Devin Frank.
I'm Michael Ledbetter.
I'm Melissa Sellender.
And I'm Jaden Rivera.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks, right? We plan on bi-weekly?
About 2 weeks. Give me some time for production, so maybe a bit longer. Who knows when you'll be listening to this on YouTube or Spotify. You're currently listening on to it, whatever device you're currently listening on, because we have not discussed post-production processes yet.
We have not.
So if you want to know where to find us, well, you did. Congrats.
Thank you. Also, I actually think 2 weeks from now is midterms, so it'll probably be 3 weeks when we come back with our next movie. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you later.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.